Show me a self-made man, and I'll reveal him to be an arrogant, ungrateful fool. You see, a self-made man is simply a selfish narcissist who cannot see beyond himself. For no business was built without a customer taking a chance on you. Some teacher helped you to read and understand math and science. Some parent helped you walk and talk. And I'd even say that the Lord God Almighty granted mercy and favor. So you see, the self-made man is lost in his own perception and cannot separate that from reality. Good morning, Quinn. My name is Keith Mitchell, and I want to talk to you today about empowering ourselves through education so that we may be able to separate perception from reality. Now, when I speak about empowering ourselves through education, I don't just specifically mean a 4-year degree, but becoming more in tune with our history and the lessons we can take from our ancestors. You see, if you can convince a bird that its wings are simply for warmth and for show, the bird may never discover that it can take flight. There are those who wish to muddy the waters of history, to steal hope and clip the metaphorical wings. I stopped by today to shed some light on some of those perceptions that are merely attempts to attack those wings. Let's look at our arrival on these shores. Considered no better than livestock, the African was incapable of carrying the intellectual capacity needed to function in a white society, what was said. Our people were bought, branded, beaten, bred, butchered, and then buried. We were denied education in any form, yet we pushed through. The perception was that we were less than human, but the reality, we delivered encrypted messages in the form of Negro spirituals and developed the Underground Railroad, freeing hundreds of slaves, and carried ourselves to freedom. We bonded together. Even though our families were ripped apart, we bonded together, brother and sister, side by side, arm in arm, to restructure the family unit, to keep the unit strong and the spirit stronger. Now, perception is that by the grace of Abraham Lincoln, our beloved president, we were free. His compassion for his fellow man led him to make the gracious and merciful decision in crafting the Emancipation Proclamation. But when we empower ourselves through education, we find a letter written to Horace Greeley from the desk of President Lincoln. Quote, "If there be those who would not save the Union unless they could at the same time save slavery, I do not agree with them. If there be those who would not save the Union unless they could at the same time destroy slavery, I do not agree with them. My paramount objective in this struggle is to save the Union, and is not either to save or to destroy slavery. If I could save the Union without freeing any slave, I would do it. And if I could save it by freeing all the slaves, I would do it. And if I could save it by freeing some and leaving others alone, I would also do that. What I do about slavery and the colored race, I do because I believe it helps save the Union." Horace Greeley was a writer for the New York Tribune and questioned Lincoln's desire to truly end slavery. I point this out merely to demonstrate a few points. First, the lukewarm nature in which President Lincoln addressed and approached slavery. Also to highlight the fact that our current vice president chose, ironically, Black History Month to highlight the achievement of Abraham Lincoln in freeing the slaves as his first tweet in Black History Month. The other thing I highlight is that it's on record, over 179,000 free blacks fought in the Union for the Civil War. And even though history books teach that blacks were on both sides, historians estimate that the ratio was closer to 50-1 in odds favoring the North. My point is that we were on the front lines in ending slavery. It was not done for us as a favor by the slave master, but by us in a country that did not value us. As we stand today, slavery is considered one of the two greatest human rights atrocities in American history alongside the Trail of Tears. But to limit it to merely a moral issue is to rob it of its economic significance, yet another perception. You see, you have to clip the wings. In 1803, the United States under Thomas Jefferson acquired land that would be known as the Louisiana Purchase. America could not afford this purchase and borrowed the money from two separate European countries, so we were deep in debt. The United States, in response, expanded its slave labor into the newly acquired area to work the land. Now, to all my business folks out there, running a plantation with no wage expense can turn quite a profit. This economic boom propelled the United States to the top economy in the world. So make it plain, Brother Keith, what are you trying to say? I'm saying that the perception is that slavery was merely a human rights issue, but they have chosen to paint over the fact that it is the foundation of the greatest economy the world has ever seen. And the reason you paint over that is because if you paint over the fact that slavery is what built America, then you can paint over the fact that its slaves are in fact the bearers of the American dream, the builders and architects of the American dream, and responsible for the greatest economy in the world. Perception versus reality. You go to a more recent section in our history and find the end of slavery did not mean the end of racism and systemic oppression. We find the rise of the Ku Klux Klan, public lynchings, and the first wave of black incarceration. The 13th Amendment frees slaves but takes those rights away of a person convicted of felonious crime. Now, I don't have time to dive into that, so I encourage each of you to go to Netflix and watch 13th, the documentary, and find the correlation between the 13th Amendment, Jim Crow, and incarceration. But in this post-Civil War, post-slavery time, blacks began to form their own systems. Perception, again, was that blacks could not sustain themselves as they lacked the capacity to do so. Blacks could not keep a city standing on their own, and they were more prone to crime now that they were free. But when we empower ourselves through education, we find that from 1837 to 1930, we built 115 historically black colleges and universities, 96 of which are still standing and fully functioning. That's not counting the schools built in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and so on. And I would also point out that as we push the narrative that HBCUs are in dire straits, there are more historically white institutions that have bankrupted and folded per capita than historically black universities. Perception versus reality. When we empower ourselves, we find out about Greenwood, Oklahoma, which was known as Black Wall Street. We built over 20 cities in its image. We built many cities focused on black business, black wealth, and the oil boom of 1910 that was then burned to the ground in a matter of hours by white supremacists. You see, if Black Wall Street stands today and if we deliver the positive narrative of our HBCUs, then you empower those people and you're unable to clip the wings of ambition. You can't allow us to know that we carried on the tradition. You see, last year I addressed the fact that they tried to say that Negro spirituals were not in fact code. But you cannot deny the fact that we took those codes forward to navigate the oppressive South. You see, we packed entire meals in cars. We had packed extra gas cans because in order to travel from town to town, our lives were in danger. We slept in funeral homes instead of hotels because our lives were in danger. The same traditions we brought over from the Underground Railroad. Perception versus reality. The last segment of our history that I'll touch on and then I'll get out of your way is the Jim Crow era of 60s, a time when civil rights leaders and protesters, a time of I have a dream and what many would consider the proper way to protest. So many folks love to recite Dr. King, as they should, a great man who had a dream that one day all God's children will be able to join together and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual, free at last, thank God Almighty, we're free at last. The perception at that time is that there was an increase in crime, and that was due to the likes of Malcolm X and his anti, as they said, MLK style of protesting. You see, blacks that did not protest properly must have been prone to some sort of crime. Perception versus reality. But again, church, when we empower ourselves through education, we find that the rise in crime was in fact due to baby boomers coming of age in the late 60s to early 70s. And simply as the population increased, so did crime. There was no correlation between the black community and the increase in crime. We also see in King's famous speech, Normalcy Never Again, that is also known by its nickname, I Have a Dream, we find these words: and there will be neither rest nor tranquility in America until the Negro is granted his citizenship rights. The whirlwinds of revolt will continue to shake the foundations of our nation until the bright day of justice emerges. You see, Dr. King's speech focused on America defaulting on its promissory note that all men are created equal. He pushed for civil disobedience in the face of adversity. He fought against poverty and was jailed, beaten, and eventually assassinated for protesting the right way. And we are led to believe that the movement died with him, but we know the fight carries on today. Which brings us to today and where we are. When we look at our history, we see that at each turning point, each new beginning, there was a new barrier, a new fight, a new cause, a new challenge, which can cause some of us to wonder, when will it end? When is it time for oppression to cease? and for true racial justice and equality. When is that time? I know this political climate has some of us worried. The state of the black community has some of us worried. As we sit here today, we still face a new form of slavery. We face the resegregation of our school systems. We still face police brutality. We still face voter suppression. We still face systemic racism. We still face inequality in the criminal justice system. We still face. Some in this country would describe our black history as a history of defeat and turmoil, a story of clipped wings and shattered dreams. But I say this to you today. This is not a story of suppression and defeat, but instead a story of overcomers, survival, and revival. As Brother Killens pointed out last week, a story of old-time wisdom, faith, and vision. We had the wisdom to construct the Underground Railroad and coded freedom messaging. We had the wisdom to navigate Jim Crow's America. We had the faith to build for tomorrow, knowing we couldn't take advantage of it today. And we had the vision that one day, the architects and builders of the White House, that one day, for 2 terms, we would sit a black man to hold the highest office in the world. You see, our people have sat where they said we couldn't sit, built what they said we couldn't build, ate what they said we couldn't eat, learned what they said we couldn't learn, bought what they said we couldn't buy, and then sold what they said we couldn't sell. Remember that time. Our people were knocked down so hard we couldn't get back up. Me neither. You may ask yourself the fair question of why. Amen. Why do we still in 2017 have to teach our children what to do if stopped by the police as a survival tip? Why in 2017 do we still have to bring attention to the value of black life? Why, you may ask yourself, in 2017, are we still battling? Why are people still trying to clip our wings? Quinn Chapel, take the eagle, considered by many the king of birds. But why is the eagle the king of birds? It's not the largest bird. It does not have the largest wingspan. It does not have the sharpest vision. It doesn't even have the greatest call. In Hollywood, they use the hawk in place of the eagle. So why is the eagle king of birds? Because that is what it is ordained to be. You see, when God has put his mark on something, there's nothing that man can do. So my brothers and sisters, they may try to clip your wings and clip the wings of ambition and prosperity, but they can't speak against what God has already ordained. I know it gets rough and I know it gets tough, but I'm going to ask you in the spirit of the black church to do me one quick favor. Just turn to your neighbor and tell him, you got this, because God's got you. Now turn to your other neighbor and say, you got this, because God's got you. Do me one last favor and look to yourself and say, you got this, because God's got you. So as they if they bring back slavery, we'll beat it again. If they bring back Jim Crow South, we'll beat it again. I ask you, as they try to clip your wings, I look to you and say, Isaiah 40:31, they that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up on wings as eagles. So my brothers and sisters, walk as you're ordained to walk. Run as you're ordained to run. And if you so dare, soar as you are ordained to soar. Their perception is not your reality.
Amen.